The corridor stretches, a labyrinth of old stone and fading murals, each fresco a ghost of forgotten glories. Lamplight, weak and hesitant, paints long shadows that rive with every breath of the sleeping palace. Here, even the air seems to remember. Remember the whisper of silk, the glint of steel, the chilling silence that follows a sudden scream. The very stones absorb the weight of centuries of power, of dynasty, of a bloodline stretched thin by endless ambition. Then, from the absolute stillness, a breath colder than the grave itself. A voice, barely more than a sigh, yet it pierced the hushed expanse like a dervish's blade. No one was meant to hear this, but these walls remember every drop of spilled blood. Did you see it? A ripple in the deepening darkness, a fleeting form, a whisper of cloth against ancient stone, vanishing behind that very pillar where I now stand. A shadow, a fleeting ghost in a palace built on secrets. And then, as if drawn by an unseen thread, a hand. Emerging from the deep velvet of a sleeve, it was exquisitely formed, pale as moonlit marble. It descended, not with purpose, but with a hesitant grace, hovering an instant above the pooling richness of a discarded silk gown that lay upon the cold floor, perhaps the night's final whisper of revelry, now forgotten. Her fingertips, slender and delicate, just grazed the fabric's edge. A tremor, yes. A shiver that was not of cold, but of a tension so profound it spoke of an abyss. Fragility, you might think. A moment of weakness, a girl startled by the palace's cruel echoes. But look closer, my dears. Is that the tremble of fear, or the exquisite control of one poised on the precipice of a terrible, beautiful choice? The silk lay innocent, a silent witness to a moment pregnant with fate. But the touch was a promise. Or a curse. This is where it begins, isn't it? In the silent spaces between heartbeats, where destinies are forged not by decree, but by a whispered secret and a single, calculating touch. The game, you see, does not begin on the throne, but in the shadows that lead to it. Remember this moment, this fleeting image of supposed innocence. For the throne, my friends, is not given, it is taken. And the most formidable weapon in this dance of blood and betrayal? A mask. A perfect, unblemished mask concealing a spirit as sharp as any poison, as ruthless as any blade. A fraction of a second, a breath, and the world would never be the same. The first seed was planted. The air, thick with jasmine and the weight of centuries, seemed to press down on all within these gilded walls. You see her now, don't you? A mere whisper amidst the rustle of brocade and the murmur of courtly intrigue. She was one of many, a jewel on the Sultan's endless string, her presence as fleeting as the flickering shadows cast by the oil lamps. They called her innocent, a lamb brought into the lion's den, her beauty a fragile bloom destined to wilt beneath the relentless sun of power. And indeed, her silence was her shield. Her demure gaze a mask so perfectly crafted it fooled even the sharpest eyes. But from behind this pillar, where the silence truly speaks, I saw past the silken veils and the feigned meekness. I've witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the subtle shifts in power that begin not with a roar, but with a whisper, a glance, a single, calculated breath. And in her, even then, I sensed a different current. Her quietude was not born of submission, but of observation. Her stillness, not fear, but a predator's patience. Observe her eyes now, as the light catches them. There, behind the demure flicker of her lashes, lay no childish naivety. No, there was a cold resolve, a nascent hunger that mirrored the ancient current flowing through these very halls. This palace, with its heavy, gold-threaded drapes and its incense smoke swirling patterns of faded glory, was a gilded cage, yes, but a cage she intended to command. For she was called innocent, but in her veins flowed blood that remembered ancient curses and promises of power. A legacy whispered not in words, but in the very beating of her heart. The chamber buzzed with idle chatter, a symphony of inconsequential desires. She moved, a breath among breaths, until, by a carved marble table laden with pomegranates and pearls, a sliver of finest silk, a handkerchief embroidered with a single, delicate rose, slipped from her grasp. It was an accident, they would say. A small oversight from a naive girl, easily flustered. But watch her. Watch the precise, almost imperceptible hesitation before it fell. And then the slow, deliberate bend of her slender form. Her fingers, adorned with simple rings, brushed against the cool marble as she retrieved the silk. Her head remained bowed, her gaze fixed on the intricate pattern of the floor. But just for a fleeting moment, as her hand closed around the fabric, her eyes darted upwards. A swift, almost imperceptible sweep across the room, past the courtiers, past the eunuchs, past the Sultan himself, who, engrossed in conversation, had not even noticed the fall. A scan, quick and clinical, assessing, confirming. No one had seen her intent. No one had seen the calculation. That simple, accidental gesture, the innocent act of retrieving a dropped trifle, was her first step. A silent vow made in the heart of the beast. The lamb's face indeed, for in that moment, in the soft rustle of silk, in the carefully orchestrated mistake, her innocence became the sharpest weapon in her arsenal. The silent game had begun, and she, a mere decoration, was learning to play it with a ruthless grace that would one day shake the very foundations of this dynasty. The gilded cage began to hum. A whisper here, a shadowed glance there. The rhythm, once slow and mournful, now quickened, a drumbeat beneath the marble floors. She, the quiet one, the one whose eyes still held the sheen of a forgotten garden, was no longer merely a blossom waiting for the frost. The lessons of survival in this place, where every breath could be your last, were etched not onto her face, but into the very core of her being. She had learned to play, and to win. Consider the delicate tapestry of trust. A thread pulled here, a knot loosened there. It began with the smallest things. A smile for a weary servant, a shared secret with a lesser concubine, a comforting hand on the shoulder of a worried guard. Her innocence, a cloak so finely woven, became her shield, and then her blade. She observed silently from the periphery, noting every slight, every ambition, every fear that flickered in the eyes of those around her. There was Aisha, beautiful, favored, her laughter too loud, her presence too bright. Aisha, who held the Sultan's gaze a little too long, whose future seemed secure, a blossoming rose destined for the royal garden. One evening, as the lamps cast long shadows across the Sultan's private chambers, a scroll lay discarded near a forgotten plate of figs. A missive, seal broken, its contents speaking of an unsanctioned meeting, a message carried to a distant noble house. A trifle, perhaps, a common enough dalliance, or a deadly indiscretion, depending on who found it and how it was presented. It was found, not by a watchful eunuch, nor a jealous rival, but by her. Her fingers, delicate as porcelain, brushed against the parchment. A gasp, barely audible, a sound of innocent distress. Her eyes, wide with a semblance of shock, scanned the unfamiliar text. No hurried concealment, no panicked rush to destroy. Instead, she sought out the Sultan's most trusted advisor, her voice a tremor of concern, her posture that of a frightened dove. "Forgive my intrusion, Aga," she'd whispered, "but I found this near His Majesty's divan. It seems important and broken." The advisor, a man whose life was built on discerning truth from deception, saw only confusion, a maiden's utterly guileless bewilderment. He took the scroll. The seed was planted, not by malice, but by perceived naivete. A broken seal, a message of dubious intent, found by one so utterly innocent. Who would dare suspect her of cunning, of calculation? The whispers began, small, insidious tendrils of doubt weaving through the harem. Was Aisha truly loyal? Was her family's connection to the northern provinces a strength or a liability? The Sultan's gaze, once warm, now held a flicker of suspicion, a seed of unease that grew with each passing day. Aisha, vibrant but less shrewd, began to feel the chill, the subtle shift of eyes turning away, the silence replacing laughter. Then came the second whisper, a carefully placed rumor about a particular sherbet. A certain servant, too eager, too familiar with Aisha's inner circle. The young girl, Fatma, brought the nightly draft to Aisha. A simple act, routine. But Fatma had been seen, just days before, in a hushed conversation with another, older handmaiden, a woman known to be a quiet confidant of her, the innocent one. No direct command, no explicit poison, just a suggestion, a subtle shift in the serving rota, a moment of manufactured confusion in the bustling kitchens, a well-timed absence. The next morning, Aisha was gone. Not banished, not executed with fanfare, just gone. A quiet removal, a void where vibrant laughter once resonated. A malady of the stomach, they said, a sudden, unexpected fever. The Sultan grieved, perhaps, for a fleeting moment, distracted by affairs of state. But the swiftness, the silence of her departure spoke volumes to those who understood the language of the palace. The first blossom had fallen, not by storm, but by an unseen chill, a cold, calculated breath. Do you see it now? The quiet hand, the innocent face, the dagger forged not of steel, but of whispered words and perfectly timed gestures. The game of queens had begun its deadly waltz, and innocence had become her sharpest weapon. Each glance, each soft-spoken word, a step in a meticulously choreographed dance of shadows, bringing her closer to the heart of power. The bloodline, once a distant dream, was now a path paved with silk and poison, and she, the seemingly fragile one, had taken the first decisive step. The chamber air, heavy as velvet, clung to every surface, muffling the world beyond these walls. Here, within the Sultan's private retreat, the silence was not an absence of sound, but a living, breathing entity, pressing down with the weight of generations. Even the flickering oil lamps, usually a dance of amber and gold, cast long, hungry shadows that seemed to devour the light, leaving only outlines of power and forgotten dreams. She stood, or rather existed, amidst this oppressive quiet. Her form, draped in the finest silk, was a study in stillness. Yet, beneath the serene surface, a tempest raged. Do you feel it? The tremor that runs through the very stone of the palace? It is not an earthquake, but the tectonic shift within a single soul. Her gaze, once veiled by a careful innocence, now pierced the gloom, tracing the intricate patterns of the heavy portieres, lingering on the dust motes dancing in the faint light, each a tiny, fleeting life, much like those that stood in her path. On a low, inlaid table of polished ebony, a single crystal bowl gleamed. Within it, a shallow pool of sherbet, its pale rose hue almost translucent, shimmered. The color of a first blush, perhaps, or a fading sunset, deceptive in its delicate beauty. It promised sweetness, a cooling balm to a parched throat, yet in this silent theater it pulsed with a different kind of energy. A choice, a terrible, beautiful choice. Her breath was the only sound, a soft, measured rhythm, yet to my ears it was a thunderclap in the vast, empty space of her decision. Each inhalation was a silent plea, each exhalation a surrender. The seconds stretched, morphing into an eternity, a crucible where the past and future collided. The mask, so meticulously crafted, so flawlessly worn, trembled on the precipice. Would it shatter? Or would it fuse, irrevocably, with the very skin beneath? Her eyes, devoid of overt emotion, held only a terrifying clarity. A singular, burning truth had crystallized within her. This was the moment of culmination, the peak of her ascent. She knew, with an ancient certainty that transcended mere thought, that sometimes, to become a queen, one must accept poison. Not for oneself, no, but for those who stand on the precipice of one's ambition, those who cast shadows too long, too dark, to be merely ignored. This was the true poison of power. A draught brewed not of herbs and tinctures, but of necessity and unwavering will. Slowly, with the deliberation that spoke of finality, her hand began its journey. It moved like a whisper across the polished wood, each finger a tendril reaching for destiny. The delicate porcelain, cool beneath her touch, felt not like a vessel of refreshment, but a chalice of fate. As her fingers closed around it, the crystal seemed to hum, absorbing the cold resolve that now radiated from her. The sherbet, innocent in its shimmering depths, reflected the dim light, a mirror to the new dawn breaking within her. There were no screams, no grand declarations, only the deafening silence of a soul forging itself anew. The mask did not fall, it became her face. In that single, drawn-out moment, a new power was born, ruthless and absolute. The price? Not merely a life, or even a dynasty, but the very essence of her soul, now irrevocably bound to the throne. And remember, dear observer, the soul, once bartered for power, rarely remembers the taste of freedom. She stood before it, the heart of the empire, a gilded cage forged from ambition and ancient stone. Her hand, once so tender, now bore the faint tremor of battles unseen, battles fought not with steel, but with whispers and the subtle shift of silk. Her gaze, once a mirror of nascent hope, now held the vast, cold expanse of a winter sky. Empty. Utterly, terribly empty. Do you imagine, perhaps, that such a pinnacle warms the soul? Ah, no. The throne, my dears, does not warm. It only weighs. Each carved lion, each shimmering jewel, a burden heavier than any crown. And with every rustle in the cavernous silence of this hall, a ghost stirs. The whispers behind her, subtle as the drip of poison into a gilded cup, reminded her of the sisters, the rivals, the innocents crushed beneath the relentless march of her dynasty's demand. Reminded her of the bloodline, safeguarded with such ruthless grace. The mask of innocence, once a finely woven garment, a shield against the viper's bite, had long ceased to be a choice. It had fused with her flesh, become the very bone beneath her skin. Now, it was not merely a tool, but her truth. The queen. She had scaled the mountain, yes, but what awaited her at its summit? Only the bitter wind, the vast, echoing solitude. The heavy crown, a circlet of power, reflected the cruel, cold light of the chandeliers, but offered no warmth, no solace. The price paid for this dominion, for this unwavering hold on the reins of power, would forever cling to her shadow, an eternal stain on the shimmering silk of her reign. This was no tale of good or ill, but of raw, unyielding survival. Of a woman who learned, perhaps too well, that every ambition demands its pound of flesh, and every dynasty its share of betrayal.